In November 1942, a German submarine pushed a short signal up into the cold air over the North Atlantic. Anyone who caught it wrote down the same nonsense. NCZWVUX PNYMINHZ, and dozens more clusters of letters just like those. British escort crews copied it out group by group. None of them could read a word of it. Nobody could. That handful of scrambled letters sat unread for 64 years, and by the time anyone learned what it said, the man who sent it was dead. The reason has a date. On the 1st of February 1942, the German Navy slid a fourth rotor into the Enigma machines its U-boats carried. In a single morning, Bletchley Park went dark. The British codebreakers had spent the previous year reading a good deal of German naval traffic, steering convoys around the wolf packs, and then with no warning, the inside of the enemy's mind closed to them. The new cipher carried the codename Shark. For the next 10 months, the people in Hut 8 could not break it. They felt every week of it. Alan Turing was there, and Hugh Alexander, the chess champion who ran the hut from day to day, and a small team working through the nights against a problem that would not give. Most of it came down to arithmetic, run by hand and by machine against a setting that changed every morning. By that autumn, they were working in shifts around the clock, and tempers in the hut had begun to fray. Out in the Atlantic, the wolf packs noticed the silence. Through the late summer of 1942, they sank ships faster than the yards could weld new ones, and the Admiralty, which had grown used to knowing where the boats were, suddenly knew nothing. More than 40 merchantmen went down in August and September alone. The German submarine crews had a phrase for a good stretch of hunting like that: Die glückliche Zeit, the happy time. At one point, the Admiralty sent Hut 8 a cold little memo, asking the codebreakers to give Shark a little more attention. They were giving it everything they had. It was not enough. The blackout broke because of 3 men in the water off Port Said. On the 30th of October 1942, in the eastern Mediterranean, a Vickers Wellesley spotted a U-boat called U-559, and 4 warships ran her down and held her under for 10 hours, dropping charge after charge until she had no choice but to come up. One of the ships was the destroyer HMS Petard. When U-559 broke the surface in the dark, Petard's searchlights found a white donkey painted on her conning tower. A shell from the destroyer's gun put the German crew over the side, and in their hurry, they left the sea vents shut and the codebooks where they lay. 2 of U-559's own men fished out of the water, watched the British carry that material off to a whaler, and could do nothing about it under an armed guard. 3 of Petard's men went the other way. Lieutenant Tony Fasson, able seaman Colin Grazier, and a 16-year-old canteen assistant named Tommy Brown stripped off, swam across to the dying boat, and climbed down inside it. Grazier had married 2 days before he sailed. He was 22, from Tamworth. Fasson was 29, a Scot from Jedburgh. They worked in the dark with the water climbing past their knees, passing books up the ladder to Brown, who ferried them out to a waiting whaler. He shouted down for the other 2 to come up. The hull dropped before they could. Fasson and Grazier went down with her and were never seen again. The pages they had pulled out by hand, a short weather cipher and a book of clip signal codes, reached Bletchley on the 24th of November, and on the 13th of December, working from them, Hut 8 read Shark for the first time in nearly a year. Within weeks, the Atlantic traffic began to bend the other way. Convoys steered around the packs, several 100,000 tons of shipping that winter that might otherwise have gone to the bottom, staying afloat instead. What those 2 men had done stayed secret for 30 years. The Official Secrets Act sat on it. When the awards were announced in the London Gazette in 1943, the citation said almost nothing about why. A Victoria Cross was discussed and set aside, partly because the act had not happened under enemy fire, partly because anyone asking questions might lead the Germans to wonder whether their cipher was still safe. Fasson and Grazier each received the George Cross. Brown, who had lied about his age to get into the Navy, became the youngest man ever to hold the George Medal. The naval historian Ralph Erskine, who spent years on this corner of the war, wrote that few acts of courage by 3 men can ever have had so far-reaching consequences. The machine those pages opened was a stubborn piece of engineering. The naval Enigma had run on 3 rotors until that February, when the 4th one went in. The new rotor, called Beta, did not fit the other 8 slots and could not be swapped with them, but it still multiplied the number of possible settings by 26. The British decoding machines, the bombs, had been built to chew through 3 rotor traffic in under a day. Against the four-rotor version, they could take 3 weeks to recover a single day's key, by which time the orders inside were stale and the convoy was already sunk or saved. The whole edge of code breaking was speed, and the fourth rotor had taken the speed away. The weather cipher off U-559 was the crack in the door. U-boats radioed stripped-down weather notes in a code Bletchley now held, so the team could guess the plain words behind a scrambled signal and grind backward from there to the day's setting. Even with the door open, the four-rotor traffic stayed slow, grinding work. Purpose-built four-rotor machines did not reach the codebreakers until the middle of 1943, and from late that year, much of the labor passed to the U.S. Navy and its banks of new gear. Hartwig Looks sent his signal into the middle of all this. He commanded U-264, a type swim-sea boat built at Bremen and put into service in the spring of 1942. She left Kiel at the start of November on her first war patrol, slipped through the gap between Iceland and the Faroes, and joined a wolf pack called Kreuzadler that was tearing at a westbound convoy, ONS 144, in the heavy gray water of the North Atlantic. On the 17th, Looks put a torpedo into a Greek freighter, the Mount Taurus. 3 days later, a Norwegian corvette, the Potentilla, came down on him with depth charges and went home certain she had killed a U-boat. She had not. She had been hammering U-264, which slid away unmarked, and the kill she claimed was eventually credited to a boat that had not even been there. It was during that running fight that Looks did what a captain was trained to do. He kept reporting. It was a shadower's signal, the sort meant to hold a wolf pack onto a convoy. The enemy's place, his heading, his speed, passed back so the other boats could close in. From beneath the surface, half blind, he noted where he had last seen the enemy, which way they were steering, how fast, and what the weather was doing. Then he ran the lot through the four-rotor machine and pushed it up into the air, where his enemies copied it down and could not read it. The timing is the strange part. By the moment Looks pressed that report out, the books that would open Shark had already been carried out of a sinking U-boat off Port Said. They had not yet reached the people who could use them, so the signal was beyond reach by design and beyond reach by accident at the same instant, and it stayed that way. After the war, it went into a box of intercepts no one had ever solved. Why those particular signals were never revisited once Bletchley was back inside Shark, the record does not say. They simply sat there. Of all the signals the German Navy sent across the war, almost everyone was either read at the time or lost for good. A bare handful had been copied down, never broken, and filed away in someone's records. In 1996, Ralph Erskine published the raw letters of 3 of them in a cryptology journal, intercepts that had never given up their meaning. Looks himself outlived his own dispatch by a long way, and so for a while did his boat. U-264 went back out through the worst months of the U-boat war and survived them. She was hunted again and again. In April 1943, escorts from a convoy battered her so hard she nearly broke apart, and her crew patched the holes at sea and kept going. In the great fight around convoy ONS-5 the following month, one of the largest sea battles of the whole campaign, she sank 2 more ships, a British vessel and an American one. Then the war turned hard against the U-boats, and Looks took her home. When she sailed for the last time in February 1944, she carried something new. U-264 was one of the first operational boats fitted with a schnorkel, the breathing tube that let a boat run its diesels and recharge while staying under, hidden from the aircraft that had begun to own the Atlantic sky. On the 19th, she rose to about 20 meters to raise her aerial and signal headquarters, and a group of British sloops found her within minutes. They belonged to Captain Frederick Walker, the Royal Navy's most successful U-boat hunter, who had sunk 3 boats in a single day 10 days before and was not slowing down. His ships held U-264 under and rained charges on her. She threw out decoy gear and twisted and could not get loose. More than 250 charges drove her past 200 meters before Godalming. Looks blew his tanks and brought her up to be shot at. Every man aboard got out. All 52 of them were pulled from the sea and spent the rest of the war as prisoners. And under questioning, they handed the Allies a clear picture of the schnorkel they had been testing, its promise and its faults. Looks went home when the fighting ended, lived a long civilian life, and sat for an interview about it all as an old man, talking through the patrols and the boat and the day she went down. The signal he had tapped out in 1942 was still unread when he died in October 2005. 4 months after that, a software engineer in Germany finished the job the Royal Navy had started off Port Said in 1942. His name was Stefan Krah, and in January 2006, he opened what he called the M4 project, named for the 4-rotor machine. The 3 intercepts were still sitting there, unread, 60 years on, a standing dare that no one had answered. The trouble was the same trouble Hut 8 had faced. The number of possible settings on a 4-rotor naval Enigma is so large, by one reckoning a problem the size of an 86-bit cipher, that one computer would grind at it for an unreasonable stretch of time. Krah's answer was to split the work across the internet. Thousands of strangers let his program run on their machines while they slept, each one testing a slice of the possibilities. The rotor orders churned through by brute force, while a climbing routine felt its way toward the plugboard wiring. It was the same fight Turing's people had waged by hand and by bomb, handed now to a web of idle home computers. The whole thing ran in the open, the kind of volunteer computing that was spreading across the internet in those years, and every setting it recovered was posted for anyone to check. It took about 2 weeks. One of the 3 came apart first, and a second followed within weeks. The plaintext opened with a name, von Looks, the German read, which is just from looks in English. Then came the rest of it, in plain naval language any old sailor could have read in 1942 if someone had handed it to him. Forced to submerge under attack, depth charges. Last enemy position at 0830 in grid square AJ 9863, course 220, 8 knots, pursuing. Barometer at 1014 and falling, wind north-northeast at force 4, visibility 10 miles. When researchers set the decoded text against the surviving war diaries, the details lined up. The grid, the bearing, the weather. The signal traced back to U-264's first patrol and to the captain whose name had opened it. It was a true page out of one November day in the Atlantic, copied down by Looks's own enemies, locked away from them by 4 spinning wheels, and handed back to the world 6 decades after every man who touched it had either died or gone home. Most people won't look this up on their own. That's what this channel is for. Subscribe if you want to keep going. 2 sailors drowned inside a flooding U-boat to seize the books that would open this cipher. Thousands of strangers, half a century later, lent their computers to crack one frozen signal out of that war. And the prize at the end of all of it was a weather reading and a compass bearing, the most ordinary traffic a U-boat ever sent, true for a few hours and then worth nothing to anyone. U-264 gave up its crew and its newest secret in a single afternoon in 1944. The one thing it managed to keep hidden longest was a note about the wind. Looks died in the autumn of 2005, 4 months before the words he had encoded came back into the light. The last of Erskine's 3 intercepts held out even longer. No one broke it until 2013, and what it had been guarding all that time turned out again to be almost nothing.